Okay, looks like we're live. Hello, folks, and welcome to another Perfect Scale webinar where we bring the brightest minds of our industry to talk about all things infrastructure, Kubernetes, architecture, and cost optimization, of course. And today I'm very happy to have with me Nataliya Godunok. Nataliya is a senior solutions architect at AWS, dealing with all the things architecture and cost optimization. Is that right, Nataliya?
Yes, exactly. Thank you, Anton. Yeah, I'm the solution architect on the Cloud Optimization Success team at AWS. And in our team, we help customers improve their architectural health and make sure that they run their workloads efficiently through adopting the well-architected best practices. We will talk a little bit about well-architected later, so I hope that many people who are joining today, they are familiar with it. And yeah, in addition to my day job, I'm one of the core members in our internal technical field community, focusing on cost optimization, cloud financial management, and FinOps, which is why I'm very excited to talk about the Frugal Architect.
Okay, and we're very excited to learn from you. So definitely tell us all you have to tell.
Yes, I hope that this will be more like a discussion, or I really hope that we will be able to make it an engaging session. So for everyone joining, feel free to ask your questions in the Q&A, and we will see what we can answer together with Anton. Between the two of us, I hope that we will be able to provide, the guidance and the best practices and answer your questions.
Yep,
yeah, so
definitely.
thank you for your intro. And yeah, speaking about the Frugal Architect then. So as I mentioned, so for me, this is quite an exciting topic because I've been doing a lot of the cost optimization related work with customers and partners for pretty much my whole time in AWS. And if you ever watched Dr. Werner Vogel's keynotes, you would notice that he often talks about simple concepts in a very thought-provoking way. And if you haven't watched his keynote from last year, last year's reInvent, I highly recommend it because this is where he introduces us to the Frugal Architect. And the idea of the Frugal Architect is somebody who knows how to design cost-aware, sustainable, and high-performing modern applications. So being the Frugal Architect means that without compromising on the performance or availability or especially security, you should still build AWS workloads where cost and sustainability should be your non-functional requirements. So yeah, as I said, I'm kind of excited about this whole concept of the Frugal Architect and how it aligns with all of the architecture best practices that we typically recommend our customers they should follow. So yeah, in this session, hopefully we will discuss these practical tips and techniques, and you will have some recommendations by the end of it, how you can start implementing these best practices like in a correct way in your environments when you're building on AWS, and how you can be building more efficient systems overall. I think we just ran a poll there. We already made our introductions, but we would like to learn a bit more about our audience as well. So please let us know your role, which team you're with in your organization, and while we are talking about architecture and cost optimization best practices, or specifically for container environments and Kubernetes, for us it's interesting to know also what's our audience. Are you an engineer? Are you a developer, architect, a manager? So that maybe we will be able to provide some recommendations or answer your questions, in the right way, so that it would apply to you more depending on the role in your organization. Now, so that was the intro to the Frugal Architect and why are we talking about this today. Now, cost is only one aspect of the architecture when you're thinking about building an AWS, right? But there's much more to that. So what often happens is when we are building our workloads, or generally software teams, they fall into this kind of trap, assuming that their current technologies or the way how they are building their workloads right now, or the way they've built them in the past, that is correct and it will always be correct. And yeah, we know that we have great teams that are building great things. And we want them to make, the best choices at the time when they are building their applications and their workloads. But the challenge sometimes is that we keep saying that, okay, we built it the correct way, it always worked correctly, it never failed. And the challenge is that sometimes we are assuming that it will never fail and it will always be correct and it will always be following the best practices. However, the best practices are always evolving when it comes to architectures and designing your applications, and that's why we need to keep up. And for that, to help you with making these architectural choices, we have the Well-Architected Framework. I'm not sure if people can write anything in the chat, or I don't think if people have access to the chat, but I'd be curious to know if, how many people are familiar with the Well-Architected Framework, and maybe have run some reviews on their workloads. But I would assume that many people will be familiar with it and with all the pillars that we have. So the idea of having these pillars, like if you're applying these best practices to your workload, is that you are using the guidance about technology, people, and processes, as well as different tools and techniques that help you review your workloads and also design the architectures that align with these best practices. And the idea is that following these best practices should help you help you run workloads that bring the most value out of your AWS investment. And that's an important point here when we talk about cost optimization in particular. So it's not, cost optimization is not really about reducing cost or reducing spend. It's only part of it, right? But it's more about bringing the most value out of each dollar that you spend on AWS. So all of the pillars that we have in the Well-Architected frameworks, they, in one way or another, they also relate to cost. And in some cases, when you make these architectural decisions, you have to make some trade-offs, and very often it will be like trade-offs between like cost and reliability, for example, or cost and performance. But the ultimate goal here is for you to be able to make those right architectural choices to achieve the like business outcomes. I hope it will make sense, even more as we follow our session today and we talk about, specific techniques, how to optimize container workloads. So yeah, so that's kind of the introduction to our session today, talking about Frugal Architect, and we will be talking about thinking of cost at every sort of part of your build process, every part of your design process as you're building your workloads, and also considering other architectural choices that you need to make. Anton, any feedback or ideas so far before we start talking containers?
We still don't have any questions from the audience, and I really encourage you to ask questions. So if there is anything unclear regarding the well-architected framework, I know from my own experience, like I know the framework's there, right? And I've been building stuff on AWS for years before I even had time to look at the well-architected framework, because the nature of our work is like we build first and then we ask questions about what we've built later on. So yeah,
and we optimize later. That's very typical, yes.
Exactly.
Yeah, we see this very often with customers. They, want to move fast, they want to innovate, and then they worry about optimization later. And it doesn't have to be just cost optimization. It's just generally workload optimization, kind of when the workload is in operations already. But what we want to encourage thinking about architecture, as early as possible. It's never really too early to start. So when you're thinking of building something, think about those best practices that you might need to follow from the beginning, because it's much easier to do this first before, trying to fix any kind of issues later. And yeah, speaking about making all this architectural choices, let's get to the topic of containers, right? So as many of you might know, that AWS has the broadest set of services and technologies and tools that can help you build applications and containers, and we also have deep integrations and with like different open source and partner technologies. So there's no really one correct way to build on AWS. It really depends on your business requirements, on what you're trying to do, your application requirements, and also skills. That's also another reason how people are choosing different kinds of services and technologies to build with. So there's no really one correct way. And yeah, a lot of our largest customers, they build in multiple ways using, like, for example, the two kind of biggest services that we have for containers is ECS and EKS, Elastic Container Service and Elastic Kubernetes Service. Those are kind of, we call them the orchestrators. But yeah, a lot of customers might be also just running kind of workloads on EC2 and using their own kind of managing their own container environments, not necessarily using AWS native or AWS managed services like ECS or EKS. But the idea is that whenever you want to build something with containers, you are going to need solutions that provide you sort of with a number of capabilities to allow you operate those containerized workloads as well. So once you have that, let's say, containerized workload, then you will need a way to organize and deploy the images. So for that, again, AWS has services as well. And you will also need an orchestrator, with compute to schedule and deploy those images sort of and run your workloads over time. But then another thing to consider is that there are all these other things like observability and monitoring, and you'll need to make sure that your workload is secure. Then things like core networking, and of course cost management and FinOps practices that come together with it. So it's not just about that containerized application. It's not just about selecting the orchestrator or running particular services, but you always need to consider kind of the rest of the infrastructure. And this is where some of our well-architected best practices, they come to play, and they provide you like guidance and recommendations how to do it in an efficient way, how to make the right choices, how to optimize as you're building and then as you're operating later as well. So yeah, so I wanted to put it a bit into perspective and, to give you context that it's not just about like one pipeline or like a specific kind of service that we recommend selecting, for containerized workloads. Yep.
Not just about running the containers, but also about all the additional concerns, like things that could be thought of as non-functional requirements in that context.
Yes. Yeah, exactly.
And we have a question.
Oh, okay.
And it's a great one, quite expected. You mentioned ECS and EKS, and somebody, an anonymous attendee, is asking, when deciding between ECS or EKS, how do you factor in the cost of upskilling engineers with cloud skills into making these architectural decisions?
Yeah, that is a very good question. So I'd say so sometimes customers ask us sort of which orchestrator to choose, and what we often see is that customers who are new to, let's say, containers and they want to start and they are already on like AWS customers, so they often go with ECS first because it's relatively easy and scalable way to to start, and you might not have, let's say, the skill set within your teams to let's say work with Kubernetes. So yeah, ECS, from what we can see, is a good way to start. And then if you already have the skill set and let's say your teams are already familiar with Kubernetes, like then it's much easier to start with EKS. In terms of upskilling, what I can tell is that AWS has a lot of resources, both free or paid resources, like depending on what you want to go with. You would have access to, for example, like an account team, like the account manager, solution architect, or who will be able to help you create like a plan, and they can come in and run workshops with you, and they can engage other SMEs and experts to help upskill your teams on these technologies. So of course, we want our customers to succeed. So we, have those resources available. But also we partner with our partners. So AWS actively works with partners who help, with this as well, both from the kind of consultancy perspective and tooling and training if needed. And yeah, I think the question in terms of factoring in cost of us upskilling, I guess it really depends on what you are trying to achieve from business perspective. So like, for example, if you plan to migrate or if you plan to use the new technology, it's kind of part of the planning process. So you kind of factor that in like the total cost of ownership in case you need to upskill your, let's say engineering teams. But from like the operational perspective, like as I mentioned, so there are resources and there are teams from AWS who can help, and the SMEs are available to help in this process as well. I hope it makes sense. Yeah.
Definitely. Yeah, we like as vendors, we're happy to help with upskilling and to take part of that cost on ourselves. And we actually did something like that just last month. We as Perfect Scale, we did a workshop together with the AWS user group in Berlin, providing an EKS workshop and then an optimization workshop on top of that.
Yeah. I guess in short, to summarize like what I said, it really depends like what's your role in the organization, and yeah, like let's say as a manager of or maybe a head of a department, you would probably be pairing up together with maybe finance teams and like planning for the kind of budget for migration. Potentially, I'm just trying to come up with like one scenario, like how it could go, and like let's say the cost of like upskilling the teams could be part of that, like total cost of ownership that you would calculate as part of the process. But if you're already in it, and if you're already like planning or starting like to test certain things on AWS, then yeah, reach out to your AWS representatives or partners that you work with, and they'll be able to help.
But let's say you made the right architectural decision and you're on EKS.
Yes, so we have the scenario example here with EKS, right? So to put it a bit into context. So yeah, imagine that you've started, let's say you're starting as a full stack developer and you're working on your first project, you're developing this application. And so let's say as a developer, you create some code, you package it into container, and most likely you will be like testing it locally, right? So you could decide to run that container using a local Kubernetes, and let's say you will test it, and then you will later want to deploy it somewhere, like on AWS, for example, that it could be so that it could be accessed by other services, and you could continue testing on AWS, and let's say you could access it somewhere sort of through load balancer, and let's say you might also want to deploy it sort of to integrate with other applications and other tools for observability or vulnerability scanning. So imagine like if we have this kind of solution that might look like this, then the container build process would be automated, and then the container image would be tagged and stored in a container registry. So like, for example, we have Amazon ECR, the container registry service. So and in this example, we would be using EKS. So let's say we could be using like a YAML to deploy the containers onto EKS sort of containers and pods into the EKS environment. And what we want then is to integrate the application with all of those other core capabilities to have this like full well-architected container solution. And all these other capabilities like the observability, alerting, logging, they don't necessarily have to be AWS native. Like we do have, AWS native services. Like for example, you could use things for like observability and telemetry, like CloudWatch or GuardDuty, or could use Amazon Inspector for vulnerability testing. But again, it doesn't necessarily have to be AWS native. If you're already familiar with some other tools that you're utilizing for your environment, for kind of logging, for example, and observability, you could still use it. So the important takeaway and the important point here is that regardless of the operational tooling and regardless of this other kind of core tools and services that you can join in this process, the whole container build pipeline is the same. It's not changing. So the way how you would be using, the images, how you would build in your containers, the process is the same, though some of the kind of core tooling in this whole pipeline, like I said, the kind of observability and logging, they could be different. And this is where, we also have, so there are AWS native tools, but we also have partners that we might be recommending, depending again on whether it works for you. Yeah, I hope that this kind of puts it a bit into perspective, of the whole pipeline. And the idea is like when you are following this well-architected best practices, is that you will be able to notice techniques and where you can optimize and be more efficient at every step of this process. Again, regardless of the other tools that you might be using for like observability, logging, and alerting, even like if you follow the actual kind of container building and deploying the whole pipeline, there are some best practices that you can follow how to make it more efficient, both from cost and performance perspective. One thing that's, to make connection to the well-architected here is that I wanted to show is that I mentioned that we have 6 pillars in the well-architected, right? And if you implement those best practices in the workload, then you build your efficient workload, efficient applications. However, one thing that we also have is called the well-architected lenses. So in addition to the generic best practices that you might find, where, for example, cost optimization is one of the pillars, we also have industry-specific or technology-specific lenses that provide more prescriptive guidance and best practices that are tailored to the specific type of technology. And in this case, so what I wanted to show is that we have the container build lens. So in addition to generic, standard well-architected best practices, this one also provides you additional recommendations how you can be more efficient. And I wanted to briefly show in the console how it might look like and where you can find these best practices, because I believe that this might be useful for you, later if you wanted to kind of go back to your teams and review your workloads and understand on whether you are following those best practices or not. But I know that we were running some polls. So while we are talking about this, while we're talking about architecture, do you have the results of the poll? Who do we have in our audience? Do we have technical people, engineers, FinOps practitioners? Did we stop the
I'm not
poll?
sure. Yeah, I'm not sure. Do I have the? I don't see the results of the poll. No, not yet. Not yet.
Not yet. Okay.
Okay,
So,
but
because I was.
we do have questions.
Oh, we have questions. Okay, so before we get
Yeah.
back to that demo.
So you were talking about the lenses. Any recommendations? How often should we review our workloads, or I guess the architecture in general, against the standard best practices of the lens?
So, well, the typical answer is it depends. I'd say it depends on, how often you're changing something in your application. Many customers that we work with, they will do it twice a year. That seems to be like a kind of standard cadence. But this might be difficult to do at scale in like very large enterprises, very large organizations. In which case, we might say that, okay, right. You could do it also like once a year as a kind of one big exercise across multiple most critical workloads. If you're only responsible for like smaller workloads or less workloads, then twice a year seems to be like a kind of standard cadence that is recommended and that what we see customers follow. And we sometimes also get questions regarding how long it takes to do it. And some customers say that, it takes long, but it might take longer the first time because you need to get familiar with the process. you would need to kind of understand the questions or the best practices, but then when you do it the next time, then it will be faster because you will already follow some of those best practices, and you will only need to kind of update the questions that you were not able to answer for the first time. So hopefully, every next time that you do it, it will take much less time for you. Plus, also we have a lot of tools that can help you automate the process. I'll leave that for the end of the session. I might provide some links to, for example, workshops, and yeah, hopefully it will be useful. Yeah.
Great. Okay. We have another question, but I'll leave that for the end. Oh, okay.
Yeah, I think we had like a result of our.
Yeah, we got the poll results.
Okay, great. So we have DevOps Cloud Ops engineers, right?
Yeah, most, like 50% are engineers, then a few solutions architects, and a little bit of management.
Yeah, great. So that will give me some context later when I talk about the kind of where this whole idea or culture of FinOps comes to play as well. Okay, so going back to this kind of building EKS workloads and following the well-architected best practices. So I just briefly wanted to show where you can find the information about this container build lens. So like, let's say if you were running the well-architected review on your workload, so I'll just pick one like as an example. Like, let's say I have this application, I defined my workload, and I already answered some of the questions. The kind of final report was generated for me, and I know that I need to maybe fix a couple of things to follow those best practices. But I was only using the kind of general, the well-architected best practices. So if I want to apply this additional lens that is container specific, so let's say this is my containers workload, I can edit it here, or whenever you're defining the workload, you can also do it from the very beginning. Yeah, this is where you can find all of these lenses. So we have the kind of AWS standard lens catalog in the tool. And as you can see, the general well-architected framework lens is applied by default always to the workload. There's another thing that you can do. You can also create your own custom lenses, but that's not part of today's session. That's probably for another time. So from the default catalog that we have, so all of these lenses are available in the form of like a white paper where you can just read through those best practices and just have an understanding of, have a rough understanding of whether you're following those best practices or not and what can be improved. But if you want to do like a formal kind of review process, then you can find the lens, specific to that industry or technology type, in our case, containers. And then you save it, you apply it to your workload. So now when you go back to the workload, you would continue reviewing and like checking out this kind of best practices through the well-architected review process. So I'll click on this container build lens here, and I will also have all of this like pillars, right? So the idea of having these best practices specific to a specific technology or kind of industry, it still follows the same structure in a way that it provides best practices for each pillar, but they are a little more prescriptive to, like, again, particular technology. Like, let's say what we will cover, let's say we will talk about performance and cost optimization today. So some of these questions will be more specific to containers and building container images. How do you generally manage or right size your container images? How do you reduce the pool time? And then, yeah, you can kind of consider so having your workload in mind, you then would be able to answer some of these questions. And then, when you click on like info, like for example, if you're not sure what this kind of best practice is referring to, on the right-hand side, you will have also additional helpful resources. So this is quite a comprehensive list of these best practices that you can follow. And like, if you don't know where to start, and if you don't know really what should be your start in this journey, you could at least, like take a look at these best practices here, and then kind of having your workload in mind, you would be able to answer these questions and understand, okay, where I am now and where I need to go to be closer to, following these best practices. So yeah, that's one example that I wanted to share here. And yeah, I would suspect maybe not a lot of people would know that we have these lenses, and then like specifically for your EKS workloads, that would be a good place to start to understand where you are. Anton, anything to add from you?
Yeah, so there's a question, and I think we discussed this before before the webinar, right? So the anonymous attendee is asking. He says the container build lens is great, but is there a lens on running EKS workloads?
So there's no specific lens for EKS, but so I'll later have somewhere at the end of the slides, I'll have like a link to the EKS kind of best practices, well-architected best practices. There's a resource for that. So I'll share that link. Yeah. But we will have one of the later slides where me and Anton, between two of us, we will actually take these best practices that I showed and kind of apply to the EKS, and we'll provide some examples that you can follow on some of the techniques. Yeah, so yeah, so as I was showing, and I was talking about well-architected, right? Like there are multiple pillars that you'd need to sort of follow, and you'd need to apply those best practices. And the challenge sometimes we see from customers is how do I balance between these pillars? Because in architecture, every decision will come with trade-offs. And cost, resilience, performance could be your non-functional requirements, and very often they will also have a bit of like a tension with each other. So it's crucial to find that balance between your technical and business needs. So for example, the well-architected review process is one of the ways or one of the mechanisms that can help you prioritize the right, to make the right architectural choices. And typically the way we recommend doing it is it would be based on urgency and business impact. And this is where it's important to have the connection between the development teams or the engineering teams and the business teams, and have them talk to each other. So from what we can tell from our poll, we have a lot of the engineers on the call, or a lot of people who are more, I guess, hands-on. And sometimes when we talk about architecture and about this kind of making architectural trade-offs with the engineering teams, they struggle to prioritize. And this is where we often say that this is where we need to kind of bring in all the other stakeholders from the business side to understand really what you're trying to achieve and how to make the most out of this like techniques and best practices. So with that said, so I wanted to have a bit of discussion to talk about some examples, how, based on this well-architected best practices, and specifically best practices from the container build lens that I showed before, how we can take those and kind of apply to the EKS workloads. So I have a few examples here, and I hope Anton will be able to also add his perspective. So in terms of the right sizing, it's probably, well, and yeah, of course, since we talk about performance versus cost and making this kind of trade-offs between the two, some of this, like if you follow these practices, some of them will be beneficial to both. And in some cases, you will need to kind of consider, which people should be doing what, like at the bottom there, where we have metrics and where we need to be monitoring. Like on one side, there are certain metrics that you would use for performance, certain metrics that and certain tools that you would be using for monitoring and observability. And on the other side, there are other tools, or it will be even different people who will be monitoring the cost and usage and will be using different tools for the reporting. But speaking from like the common things between the two, like right sizing. So some examples that I can tell. So it's recommended to use smaller parent images, as we want to use performant containers. And one example is that the operating system of the parent image that is used to create the target image will have like a huge impact on the final container size. So that's one example that is not necessarily specific to like the infrastructure itself. When we think right sizing, we often think about the like underlying infrastructure, like EC2 instances, selecting the right instance sizes and types. Yeah, that's one part of the question. But another part of it is also, the actual sort of parent images that you're using, like because it might impact like the time it takes to deploy them, and as it's taking time, it's taking the resources, so you end up paying for those resources if it's, let's say, running on like EC2 instances, for example. So that's from like right sizing perspective, like one example, and
And
another.
that's funny because it's like many other things in tech. We use the same terminology for different things. So right sizing for images is one thing. Then you have right sizing for EC2 instances.
Yeah.
When we at Perfect Scale talk about right sizing, we usually talk about pod right sizing, and that's allocating the correct resource requests and limits to the pods that we're running on Kubernetes. And that's another thing
Yeah.
that you need to
Yeah.
take into account.
Yeah, but that's all part of, I guess, the same mechanism, I'd say, of right sizing. So it's not, don't think of right sizing just as a like underlying infrastructure. So it's all of the elements, other elements that we mentioned as well. Another example in terms of like the efficient container build processes, right? Like let's say you might want to exclude certain files from your build process, like similarly to the git ignore file. You could use the like docker ignore file and sort of to remove potentially some of the files that are not necessary, that are not needed. Yeah, you sort of like every time when you build those images based on the parent images, like you would need to measure the performance impact of the changes as well. So yeah, those are some of the examples that could be like part of the like efficient container build process as well. And another thing would be using the container registry close to the cluster. So let's say if it's an AWS, like you would potentially use the same region. And if it's like a multi-region deployment, then probably like the CI/CD chain could publish, container image to multiple regions. So yeah, so you'd need to kind of consider this from like the resiliency perspective as well, and like from how exactly, from the perspective of how you automate the process. About the CPU architectures, another thing is, so again, one example, like let's say if you have an autoscaling.
Nataliya,
Yep.
if you're looking at slides, we don't see your slides. We currently see the well-architected.
Oh no. Okay, let me see. I was talking about the examples and showing this.
It was
Okay,
still
one moment.
entertaining enough, but I just realized you're referring to something we don't see.
I was referring to this. Okay. Yeah, I think, and we also wanted to run another poll about kind of optimization. And I wanted to ask a question to the audience, like when typically in your teams or in your organizations, when do you start caring about the cost optimization or generally about optimization of your EKS workloads? So I'd be curious to see what people say. Yeah, so please, yeah, let us know in that poll that should have popped up on the screen now.
Yeah,
Yeah, and
very
I think we,
interesting for us to.
yeah. So yeah, that's what I was referring to. I talked about right sizing. I talked about efficient container build processes. And yeah, no, now I'm like, was caught off guard. So
Yeah, multiple CPU architectures. Again, this could optimize you in the long run because it allows you to use ARM instances, for example, that are more
yeah,
efficient, right? Resource efficient, more sustainable in the long run. But then you would need to make sure you're building for those instances, and then you need to configure your cluster to be able to decide correctly which nodes to use for the specific images that are suitable for running of these instances, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So
yeah. Yeah, and like for example, if you're saying so the best practice recommendation for, let's say, using auto-scaling group, and especially for customers who use a combination of on-demand and spot, we generally recommend using like different kind of types of instance types and families. And a good way to ensure that you have like a better chance of like having the capacity for particular instance families is to use a different combination of instance types and families, which might also require you using different instance families with like different CPU architectures. And yes, like Graviton is like the efficient choice that we recommend customers that helps with both cost and performance compared to similar other CPU architectures. But yeah, what we often see with customers is that they often build their applications to just let's say support one type of architecture, and not necessarily are being very flexible. So yeah, so this is like on a high level some examples that you can use, and like I highly recommend checking the container build lens that will provide you more prescriptive guidance and recommendations how you can improve. So speaking about the cost side of things, so I want to we are kind of getting closer to the end and like the wrap up of the session, where we started from the topic of the frugal architect, and so I want to kind of get to the end of it, like finishing on the cost note. And I think we have the result of the poll about when people start caring about the cost of their workloads, right? So, okay, I see most people answered that when the monthly bill gets high, and some
Makes
people
a lot
said
of
that they're,
sense.
yeah, yeah, it's very common. Some people say that they're monitoring the cost and usage continuously or regularly. So that's good to know. Yeah, so from cost perspective, and like especially for those answered that they start monitoring cost and usage when the cost gets high or when the bill gets high. One big recommendation that I really wanted to point out here is regarding well, trying to turn it into a continuous process rather than doing it whenever things are on fire. So what often happens, it happens often that customers look at their monthly bill and they start looking at the cost by account or by service, and it doesn't necessarily tell them the full story on like what's happening in the environment. And tagging is a very good mechanism to help drill down and get more granular with this information. And we have some AWS native tools that can help you provide this information, like Cost Explorer or Cost and Usage Report, where you would be like, if your resources are tagged, and this of course includes the container resources too. If the resources are tagged, even down to like the cluster and pod level, then you would be able to see this information in the cost and usage report. So more helpful ways to look at your cost would be, to look at cost by application, by workload, maybe environment, or by team. And tagging as a mechanism could help with that. So why would we really care about making it more granular? It's because the business teams, the finance teams, that's what they care. And this is where, I want to kind of make this connection on why the DevOps or the engineering teams should be really talking to like the business teams and working together towards the common goal. Because every time we talk about architectures or making any sort of choices regarding services or infrastructure, it will have an impact on the business. So we can care all we want about, the technology and the cool things that we build, but when the business or the finance teams don't have the right visibility to, like the cost of it and the value of what we are doing, this is where we kind of get in trouble. So this is why it's important to have that granular cost visibility and give the teams, like the engineering development teams, the visibility of their cost. And one example, also one takeaway I wanted the audience to sort of get out of it. We have this feature that was recently launched. So it's for ECS and for EKS as well, called split cost allocation data. So whenever it's enabled, especially in an organization, then you would be able to get this granular information about cost and usage down to container and pod and namespaces level. And especially if you use tagging, then you can get like really good insights about, kind of the trends of your application and like what's happening in your environment. And then combined with any other like observability data that you might have regarding like performance, then you could have like a great kind of unit metrics or KPI based sort of insights about your resources and about your applications over time. I'll have some links to the resources later at the end of the session, but yeah, I wanted to point this out as, a kind of how we how we started from like the topic of frugal architect, and generally talking about architecture and trade-offs and the importance of having the right kind of tools and resources in place to monitor your usage and cost as well. And yeah, to kind of sum it all up, as we were talking or we were checking, which roles people who joined the webinar have, in their companies and their organization. And yeah, it looks like we have a lot of developers and engineers. So I'd be curious to know, whether you have any FinOps related processes already in your organization or not. And again, we kind of ran another quick poll over there. So yeah, please give us a quick answer. I'd be curious to know, who currently in your organization is responsible for sort of monitoring, optimizing the cost of the workloads. Ideally, we say that, it should be like a collaborative and initiative that is happening like on an ongoing basis. So let's say you take all of the best practices that you might have learned from the, let's say, Well-Architected, or you work with application teams who, give you certain requirements regarding the performance of that application. Then you talk to like business or finance teams that, they will have their input regarding what they want to see in terms of the value that those applications are delivering. And then you bring them all together into this kind of a FinOps like team or culture, or we can call it that way. So the recommendation that we have is that we tell our customers to use cost as an input from the design and kind of architecture process. So whenever you start building, before you even start kind of going hands-on, you need to encourage teams to take ownership, and accountability of the cost of their solution, of their products, and of their applications, because it's effectively the application teams who should know the application best, so that whatever choices they make from architecture perspective or even from kind of application optimization perspective, it will have then the result on the final build. And yeah, so I wanted to point out that this is where the kind of this concept of FinOps comes into play as like a balanced approach to optimization from like all aspects that we covered today. The building, development, architecture, design, and cost optimization as well. And yeah, for those who are not familiar and you would like to learn more, I recommend checking the FinOps Foundation and their guide to FinOps best practices. And they have a lot of very good resources on how to implement this FinOps practices in the organization. And that's pretty much like a wrap up of everything that I wanted to cover today. So we kind of come back to this topic of the frugal architect. So what I didn't have on the first slide, I didn't have the laws of the frugal architect kind of written down, but in fact, there are these like 7 laws of the frugal architect that help customers build this, cost-aware, sustainable applications. And we talked about some of this to a certain extent today, about making, cost as a non-functional requirement and thinking about cost from the very beginning when you plan to build your application. Kind of aligning with the business teams, technical teams and business teams. We talked about architecture as a serious trade-off. So we had a couple of examples, on the best practices in between like performance and cost, as you can find them in the Well-Architected, and how they apply to some of the EKS workloads. And yeah, I think one thing that we didn't really mention in details was regarding kind of continuous cost optimization. So maybe it might be a topic for future sessions. But the idea here is that, optimization is not just about bill reduction. It's about delivering the most value, at the lowest price point. So with the help of the best practices we have, in Well-Architected, and also like as a FinOps, from the FinOps Foundation, from the kind of cost optimization best practices, we encourage customers to build this continuous optimization mindset and maximize their efficiency and improve architectural health while they are doing it. So that's kind of the summary of it all. And I was mentioning a couple of resources that I have. So I suggest people to take a look at them later. And I think, so I'll leave it just for a minute. And Anton, do you have any kind of closing thoughts as well? Because we have one more slide about perfect
Yeah.
scale.
Well, first of all, of course, I like the law number 5, cost-aware architectures implement cost controls, because
Yeah.
basically that's what we do at Perfect Scale. We allow you to have very advanced autonomous cost control for your Kubernetes clusters, because it's important to understand that most of the cost of Kubernetes comes from your workloads, and your workloads actually need this cost in order to produce the value that you want them to produce. But the challenging factor there is to understand how much cost is just the right amount of cost, right? And we also have a couple of questions, Nataliya. Thank you. First of all, the session was great, very informative. So one thing that I actually also expected to be mentioned, and Christoph here is asking about, what about Carpenter for LLM and AI workloads with AWS becoming standard now for low-cost efficient workloads on the expensive chips, lower inference, I guess, and proximity to the GPU?
That's a
Lower
good
interference.
question. That's very specific and very container specific. I'm not sure if I have a good answer. Yeah, I don't think I have a good answer for that, because like we sometimes we provide recommendations about like where would you use like the cluster autoscaler, or where would you use Carpenter, and how exactly this works. So when I was speaking to some of our container specialists, so they would probably have more context and they would be able to answer this better. So I'm not sure if this is exactly the architecture type of question, but we might come back to you and maybe answer that somewhere later if we have a recording, or
Okay.
we will be
Yeah,
able to provide.
folks can reach out to you on LinkedIn, right? See if they have follow-up
Sure.
questions. But in general,
Yeah.
I think like the general notion is that AWS is endorsing Carpenter because basically this is an open source tool you've released, like AWS released, in order to make Kubernetes cluster autoscaling more efficient. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Short answer is yes, but I can't really elaborate. So.
Okay. And also another question, a specific question. What is the best way to decide between running EKS on EC2 or Fargate to ensure I'm getting the most utilization on my compute and bang for my buck?
It really would require some testing, depending on your application. So if you go with, Fargate, we often say that, kind of going serverless is like the way to go. So if you can use Fargate, so it could be a good option to just be more efficient without like worrying about the kind of underlying resources and managing the resources of the EC2. So because what we often see when customers run an EC2 is like this is where most of the over provisioning happening. This is where a lot of like the waste of resources happening. However, for some customers it works. So I guess that if you're deciding when to choose one or another, it really comes down to like whether you're able to. So I'm trying to put like it in the right way in terms of like the skills, right? Like whether you are used to what you know and the
I
skills
guess
that you have
if
sort
you
of
want
within your teams.
simplicity, right?
Yeah.
If you want simplicity, you go for Fargate. And if you're ready to be more involved into your node selection, I guess, go for EC2.
Yeah, that's one way to put it too. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Cool. Nataliya, thanks again. One thing to say is that if you're really serious about optimizing your Kubernetes clusters for both reliability and cost, we said these are often conflicting concerns, but to make sure you're taking care of both of them, give a Perfect Scale a try. It can be easily installed from the AWS marketplace if you're running on EKS. And yeah, definitely take your architecture seriously and be frugal about it.
Yeah, that's great advice. Thank you.
Thanks, Nataliya.
Yeah, thank you very much. So
And thank you everybody for watching.
yeah, I think if people have other questions, they can reach out. And also, I would suspect that a lot of the attendees will have a contact from somebody from AWS, like their account team, like account manager or solution architect or technical account manager, depending on your support level. So they are probably your best resources to provide any additional and further guidance, or if needed, like for example, you could have even like a chat with some of our container specialists who could dive deep into your specific kind of use cases, or talk more about the examples or your requirements that you have. So
Okay.
yeah, that's
Thank
probably
you.
last note from me. Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.